What's shaking, people? Back with another reaction, back with some more Bad Religion, and we're going back to their 1991 album Against the Grain. This is the third in a series of three consecutive albums that I think is basically flawless. I'll keep saying it pretty much in all the videos, but I like Bad Religion throughout their history, right up into the most recent album, The Age of Unreason, which was it 2018 or 2019? I think it's 2019. But yeah, I like all Bad Religion, but Suffer Against the Grain, or Suffer No Control Against the Grain, I just think that's their like absolute, like flawless, untouchable period. And like I said, this is the third in that run of albums. We're going to listen to a tune called Misery and Famine. It's a tune I very much enjoy sonically. It just has that classic sort of, late 80s, early 90s Bad Religion sound, which again is expressed most clearly, I think, by those three albums. Generator and Recipe for Hate 2, although again to a slightly lesser extent. But yeah, it's a song that lyrically, I'll admit, it's a bit opaque, it's a bit poetic to the point, and metaphorical, allegorical to the point where, I don't have the most confident interpretations. I do think there are maybe two things being addressed in a general sense. The first thing I would say is that it seems to be suggesting that humankind, part of our evolutionary heritage, part of the way in which the psychology and the sort of social behaviors that we've inherited as our ancestors evolved and sort of spread around the planet is this disposition toward misery and famine, whether it's because of sort of territoriality and xenophobia, a penchant for violence, a hostility toward outsiders, and so on. But also because as we continue to expand in our technology and so on and develop and multiply, resources become more scarce, and as certain powers rise relative to others, the distribution of those resources that are available becomes disproportionate and ultimately unfair, at least on ethical grounds and so on. So I think it's in one respect talking about the way in which humans sort of bring misery with them, and the fact that we're all spinning on this planet together means that nobody, not even people who would dismiss what I'm saying. I think there's a line about there are people who will impugn my verse. They will discredit what I'm trying to say here, but they're not immune to that either. They're stuck on this firmament just like everybody else. But I also think maybe it's criticizing authorities, both like ecclesiastical and scientific, meaning like while this misery and famine is happening and while these sort of inequities and injustices are playing out, there are people who, whether they're religious authorities trying to divine celestial and spiritual matters that are very arcane and not necessarily germane to everyday people's lives, or whether they're scientists who are trying to study things which might be interesting on some academic level but have no real tangible value in terms of improving people's quality of life, or bringing comfort to those who are burdened and so on. So I think there might be a criticism of sort of like out of touch ivory tower, which you could interpret again in maybe at least a couple different ways, sort of elites that again considers themselves above the rabble, that oh, I feel no affinity for the rabble, I think is the line in the song, for these people below who oh man, they're just struggling to get a meal, they don't even know what I'm studying and so on. So I think there's a critique of sort of out of touch elites that are fortunate enough to be in a position of influence and comfort such that they can pursue such things. So again, my interpretations here are perhaps a bit more speculative, a bit more personal than some of them, where again, some songs have a bit more of a clear straightaway meaning. And ultimately, none of my interpretations are authoritative or definitive, and as I always say, lyrics, on some sense, are an interaction between artist and listener, in the sense that people will always interpret ideas and words through the prism of their own experience, of their own history, of their own understandings, and of their own attitudes. And ultimately, you know, there are lines which may trigger certain aspects within that sort of psychological and intellectual matrix, which were not necessarily intended to do so by the writers. So anyway, all that in tow, let's listen to it. This is Bad Religion, Misery and Famine. Let me make sure I have the right track number. Misery and Famine, number 14. Okay. So yeah, like I said, this is the 1991 album Against the Grain, and this is Misery and Famine. It's the dissonance, the misery.
So proud of history, replete with sanctity. Words in their harmony, they sing their code to me. Have you ever heard yourself the orbit that you're in? Lectures of President Franklin, that's a still in our band. It's misery and famine, it's a force we cannot see. Misery and famine, it compels us naturally. Misery and famine, the lips we meant to be. Misery and famine, just accept your vagrancy.
Accept your vagrancy.
Fathers have been on me, who feel their lives again. Privacy will be pain, we suffer all the same. They pay no regard to their position or their speed. The firmament still covers them with its malevolency. It's misery and famine, it's a force.
I love their harmonies, or as they say in the liner notes, their oohs and ahs.
Misery and famine, it's what meant to be. Misery and famine, just accept your vacancy. You look for meaning in things no one comprehends. You feel no ability
You look for meaning in what no one comprehends.
Success of victory has nothing to portend. They will perplex us all until the coming end. Until the coming end. A feeling of despair, hungry and full of care. We resent everywhere the fortune that we share. This
We resent everywhere the fortune that we share.
Given our pathetic course, our destiny is known.
Our destiny is known.
It's a force we can't see.
We're gonna burn.
Misery and famine, it compels us naturally. Misery and famine, the lips we meant to be. Misery and famine, just accept your vagrancy. Misery and famine. Misery and famine. Misery and famine. Misery and famine.
Tune. I mean, literally, there's no track on any of these albums where, like, it's not a legitimately quality tune. There are other Bad Religion albums where I like. You want to chill with the feedback? Where I like maybe 90% of the songs, but there is one or two where it's like, you know, I'd sometimes skip over this one. Which is funny, because in a couple cases, I remember when I first heard 21st Century Digital Boy, I wasn't a huge fan. I've come to like the tune, and I certainly do enjoy the lyrics a great deal. But I was sort of perplexed when that one sort of, you know, became kind of a hit and even got a little radio play, and it was like, of all their songs, like from, you know, the late 80s, early 90s and so on, this is the one that sort of like hit in the popular culture. It was weird to me. But again, there's not a single song on Against the Grain here, No Control before it, or Suffer before that, that I don't think is very engaging sonically and often either profound or at least intriguing lyrically. So yeah. Big ups to the band, big ups to this album in particular. I really do enjoy it. Let me know if there's another one on here you'd like to hear me react to. I think I've done like maybe 3 or 4 from this album, but I think the majority of the album remains. So yeah, shout it out if there's a tune you'd like to hear. Other than that, thank you for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.